what we're talking about, but you also can put questions on the Mentimeter. I think this is clear. How or do you need to have more instructions how to use the Mentimeter?
I think now we did it not with the QR code, you just go on Menticom, you give the code in, and then you can put in questions at any time you want. René Rossi will this time collect them and then put them into the discussion when necessary, but also if you really want to speak out and say something. We just thought sometimes we don't want to interrupt, it is a different way of communication, but if you want to speak out, don't hesitate, we have a microphone also, so just go ahead, yeah.
Okay, and I also welcome very warmly Nelli Singer. You have met her before. She's also here on the panel or at the panel to react on questions or put questions to my guests. I'm very happy to introduce Norris. She's a social anthropologist interested in how materials and technologies are culturally conceived, embedded in human economies, and how they shape local ecologies. She has worked on textiles, recycling and global waste economies, and the role of design in developing strategies for social and environmental justice. So this brings a new aspect to the table, which we so far haven't discussed in depth. Lucy is a guest professor of design research and material culture at Weißensee School of Art and Design, the same school Nelli graduated. She was a Mercator fellow at the Goethe-Universität in Frankfurt am Main. She's also acting as guest professor and has broadly published on these topics. My second guest is Barbora Pinlova. Barbora Pinlova is a PhD student in environmental science at ETH Zurich that conducts her research at Empa, so this is her place here. Welcome. She attained her Masters of Science in Chemistry at Imperial College in London after completing courses covering core topics in inorganic, organic, and physical chemistry, and defending her thesis about optimizing toothpaste properties. That's very interesting, by uncovering the interactions between the ingredients. So maybe we also have questions to that. I'm glad you have made it here. And then Michael Frede, he's a startup guy, he told me this at lunch. So he's a businessman, and in addition to many years of experience with textile and textile processes, he has in-depth knowledge of robotics and automation. Among other things, he acquired this through in-depth examination of flexible parts, shoes, or fast-moving consumer goods. I have to admit, I had to look that up. FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods, all these things we consume in a in a store, so everyday products. Exactly. So, and he will talk about, I guess, all about his robo textile project, but we first have your presentation. Lucy, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's definitely on. So thank you so much for the invitation to come. Thank you everyone for still being here, and I hope you're awake. It's been a long day, a great, fascinating day. I was asked to give this short impulse, which got longer and longer, and as I was trying to cut it down, I found so many connections with lots of the talks and many of the presentations today. So I really look forward to having a discussion later about it. So I think we're all interested in how textiles, clothing and fashion tell stories, and how their materiality, the way in which they're made, where they come from, how they've been used, what they smell of, how they feel, what kinds of value they hold. These are all some of the things that textiles are very special in being able to communicate. And textiles make connections, and we use them to weave narratives about ourselves and distant others, about our own families and communities, and about our own personal pasts, present and future selves as makers, users, and perhaps even abusers of textiles. So through our hands-on engagement with textiles as material in culture, we tell stories about who we are, where we've come from, and who we want to become. So I'm going to tell you a few stories, really, rather than a very structured talk around textiles. The first narratives I'd like to relate are of recycling and recuperation, of doing the right thing. So these piles of woolen clothing are imported into India from wealthy countries such as the UK, the US and Germany to be recycled into new yarns. So these are the clothes that have not gone into the second-hand market overseas, but they've gone for recycling. They're bought on the open market from brokers who buy them from charities and textile recycling banks. And these clothes are the donations that we make to charity or put into those textile recycling banks with charity logos on. To stop just a few of the millions of unwanted clothes from being buried or burnt. And we think we're doing the right thing, and we probably feel a little better for it. And this is a scene from factories in Panipat in North India, where you see the clothing is starting to be sorted into colour, so that it can be recycled by colour. But the clothing has to be chopped up by hand before being shredded, and it's done by the migrant women who work in these factories. They deconstruct every single garment by hand, sitting on top of and surrounded by the clothing, cutting off buttons, seams, zips and pockets. They go through the pockets, taking out sweets, toys and dirty handkerchiefs, and they get an idea of who we are, how we smell, what we leave behind. So when I was doing research in these factories in North India several years ago, we followed a rumour from place to place, a rumour which sought to explain why so many unwanted clothes and textiles end up here in this town, which boasts itself to be the largest textile recycling town in the world. And the rumour was that it was because there is a water shortage in the West. We can't afford the water to wash the clothes, it's simply cheaper to throw them away after a couple of wears and buy new ones. And this story is delivered by the truck drivers who transport the clothing from the ports, and it's sometimes backed up by the labels that say dry clean only, so there's a whole sort of ecosystem which bolsters some of these stories. But it's also because they can imagine that we're just so lucky to be able to get rid of clothes as we want to, while they simply can't. So I think I don't have time to go today, but there was a lot of research that I'd done earlier into how different people value textiles that they understand and know the origin of. So if we can simply throw our clothes away, we can also say that used and discarded clothes are relational materials. They create networks, backstories, rumours, myths, but also disconnections and a space for alternative imaginaries. So there's a film made by Meghna Gupta based on this research called Unravel, and if any of you are interested, it's on aeon.com, free to watch, and lots of copies on YouTube. But perhaps the most curious story is how these yarns that are woven back into aid blankets. So this is a kind of another layer of the story here. So these to be given away at environmental disasters. So how charity gifts are recycled into gifts of charity, but via these hidden economies. And I think it's quite interesting with the discussion about labels and certification earlier, about how this is a very sort of hidden part of that disaster relief economy. And this is a very familiar picture of Accra, Ghana, that tells another story of waste colonialism, of dumping, denial and looking the other way, except for the work of certain activist organisations who campaign against this waste and force us to see it. So these are the clothes that simply flood the local second-hand markets where there aren't textile recycling facilities and that end up in the gutters and flow out to sea. And there is still no system to deal with these sort of monster material quantities. So I want to sort of move straight on to a new story, a new conceptualisation of textile and fashion systems, and one that takes the planet as a whole. A Biomimicry Institute report asks the question, what would the fashion industry look like if it acted like a natural ecosystem? And how would we tell this story? So building up the design principles that you'll all be familiar with, of cradle to cradle, circular economy, donut economics, but changing and expanding the framework through which we understand fashion systems, and hence changing the design principles too. It's probably quite small to read, but just basic principles are on working with natural cycles, which they group into three parts: the primary producers, the consumers, and the decomposers, with the underlying proposition that our man-made materials always inevitably leak. And from this understanding, the technological cycle is embedded within the biological cycle. It's not a parallel system. And the outer circle is the biosphere, air, water, and soil. So we need to design for dispersal, ensuring that we return materials to their primary state as building blocks, thereby also reducing the requirement for complex reverse logistics and the sorting of technical materials. And moreover, working with the properties of natural materials as active matter, as Nelli was telling us about, opening up creative spaces to explore new possibilities for textiles, to use their active potential rather than continue to pacify material composites made from plastics and minerals. So very quickly, the biomimetic fashion system supports regionally appropriate fibres from agricultural wastes processed into synthetic cellulosics to durable heritage fibres, and also, which I don't really have time to go into now, but the gasification of sources of carbon waste to create syngas to feed the bacteria, which becomes part of the production chain for fermentable, compostable synthetic fibres. I'm very happy to give you any of these references if I'm rushing through. So on the left, we have a really well-known example now of Pinatex pineapple leather. And on the right, a collection made from agricultural waste by circular systems, and they claim that 6 crops, oilseed hemp, oilseed flax, banana, pineapple leaves, rice straw, and sugarcane bark, currently offer more than 250 million tonnes of fibre a year. But although their marketing suggests that they will establish socially fair processing plants in regions around the world, these are still far from being actually established. So I have been trying to find out from them where they are in developing these kind of networks of socially responsible factories, but not very far. And it's always the environmental and cost benefits of using waste as feedstock that attracts global capital investment. This also highlights the findings of a really recent report from EcoAge, the Great Green Washing Machine, and it goes back to the basics of what the Brundtland report meant by sustainability for future generations, that of paying attention to the world's poor, in this case the world's fibre farmers. The report suggests that the results of manufacturers' investments in organic cotton initiatives have not improved the livelihoods of cotton farmers. For example, or controversially, not even grown significantly more organic cotton, but it has provided more cotton labelled as organic without changing basic production models. So without going into all of the verification process, you can see this is a very highly contested area with really different methods of investigation and reporting. So again, quite famous and well-known examples now from bulk threads being used by Stella McCartney. On the left, Milo grown from mycelium, and on the right, spider silk produced from fermented microsilks. But here, I find this quite an interesting example. That's Audrey Chiesa's work using living bacteria to pigment dye textiles. Because, I don't know if you're all familiar with these examples, I'm very happy to talk about it later, but she also raises some very interesting questions about what it means to be developing these alternative biomaterials out of living organisms, if they're simply slotted into the same global capitalist systems that continue to grow today, i.e. the bulk thread systems. And in an essay she wrote with the artist Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, they asked what kinds of relationships are we developing in these areas? Who is left out? Whose knowledges are being appropriated or eradicated? How are these related to matters of social inclusion, cultural diversity, of power relationships between producers and consumers? And further, how could working with non-human living organisms change our relationship to nature? So she puts these out as provocation pieces rather than necessarily a large-scale solution to the problems with dyeing in the fashion industry. So I think, again, a very familiar model to many of you, the fibre shed model, trying to understand what the limits of the local fibre system could be. Really building on biomimetic fashion systems, thinking about regenerative fibre farming linked to land use policies, agriculture and food, and building resilience through decentralisation. So really just trying to start looking absolutely again at how we build our understanding of textiles, how they're made and where they should end up. Helping to shorten supply chains to improve transparency, build carbon engagement, helping with carbon sequestration, but really importantly, building communities, finding out what local resources there are, what craft skills and heritage technologies are available, what is missing, what needs to be developed. I think there's really nice links to some of Victoria's slides, thinking about women innovating with technology, either rebuilding old technologies that are missing or building new technologies, developing new ways of making, sharing information, open systems, and how to incorporate new biotechnologies in different political contexts. So, I'm going to skip this, but this is a fibre shed that's been developed in southwest of England. And there's this woman here has completely rebuilt this mill as part of the fibre shed project. So just to end, this is a project from a student at weißensee, many you will know, Jessica Farmer, who did both her bachelor's and her master's, is also now part of the cluster. Combining locally abundant waste wool, 80% of which is wasted in Europe, with digital technologies, in this case a robotic felting arm, to experiment with creating new architectures using the active properties of new materials. This isn't necessarily going back and building your own spinning wheel, although it might be trying to reinvent new kinds of spinning wheels, but it's also about involving new digital technologies. And the last slide is experimenting with a robotic arm and small prototypes for felting in order to think about how to scale this up for wider, larger architectures. I think I'm just going to stop. This is not there. Okay. All right, so thank you.
Thank you so much for this insight. Then I would suggest that we just go on now with Barbora.
Hello everyone. In my presentation I want to talk briefly about microplastics. First, what are microplastics? The word is quite telling, but at the same time can be misleading, because microplastics are any plastic particles smaller than 5 millimeters. Microplastics are an emerging pollutant that has been raising quite a few concerns. One of the reasons, or many reasons, why we are worried about microplastics is its longevity, and also how much it managed to spread all around the globe. We have found microplastics in the oceans, beaches, lakes, rivers, soils, also in the air of cities, but also in the countryside, and also in buildings. We are surrounded by microplastics. And not only they are in the areas where people are, but we have also found them in very remote regions, like the Tibetan plate or the polar regions. Now you might think, oh, why is she talking about microplastics at this event? Textiles, or specifically synthetic textiles, are actually considered one of the prime sources of microplastics. Specifically, when we talk about microplastics from textiles, we talk about microplastic fibers, because again, the name is quite telling, they are fibers. Probably if you heard about microplastics from textiles, it was related to washing. However, is this the full picture? Yes, indeed, microplastics are released during washing. But we don't only wash the textiles, we also happen to wear them. Or they have some other kind of use, for example, outdoors. And when we wear them or use them, we abrade them, and also more microplastics are released. Now, if we take a step back and look at the washing again, we have found out that actually these microplastics which are released during washing, they are already embedded in the textiles from production. In my research, I personally looked at yarn production, and I found that indeed, in every step, there are microplastics found. And moreover, I found out that you can affect the number of microplastics found in the final yarns based on the spinning method. In the last part, I will a bit follow on Lucy, because some of the textiles, they end up in the environment because they're mismanaged, for example, like in Ghana or Chile, but also it can happen around in Europe. And during that time, they're exposed to many environmental factors that lead to the fabric degradation, and again, more microplastics are released. So my take-home message for you is, if you think about microplastics next time for your work or even in your daily life, just remember that it's a very complex topic, and it's not just about washing and using a laundry bag, but it involves all the stages of the textile life. And that's it for me.
So we have now listened to 3 presentations which provide solutions in a way, or at least asking pertaining questions, and they are on a bit on a different level. So we have the question of sustainability starts with the fiber in textile industries. Barbora, you have looked in great detail into the question, where does all these microplastic fibers come from, and you showed us that washing or the use phase is just one aspect. This brings me to the question, why on earth are we using so much textiles which are polluted by microplastics? Did you look into that question as well?
Well, the thing is, so biosynthetic textiles is mainly meant polyester, and polyester is cheap and it's very versatile and it's easy to maintain also for the user. So that's why we are, as a world, so happy about using polyester in textile industry.
So the qualities of this material is just too sexy. Can we say that in a way? But on a more technical level, could you explain why this material is so interesting? Because at the same time, it's also poisoning us.
Yeah, so I think the main issue is the price. It's just so cheap. The plastics is so cheap. That's why we are surrounded by plastics, not only with textiles, but anything. If you look in this room and you would remove plastics, it's even in every building. So it's not just a problem of textiles that it's lucrative material, but it's just how we built our society. And of course, it's not just like we cannot look at it as an evil, but it helped us progress, and it allows people to reach more products which were not accessible in the past.
Okay, so we have to look at the whole picture, not just at this fact that microfiber plastics is harmful. But at the same time, Lucy, you showed us kind of alternatives, like this fiber shed initiative. Could you explain a bit more in detail why such alternatives are important, even if they are not quite at the same, or they're working not at the same level like the industrial fiber production?
Yeah, thank you. I think, I find it sort of fascinating because it started in California, as you're probably all aware. It's spread throughout different parts of America and Europe, but it is also now in different forms spreading to different parts of the world. So there are ones in Tamil Nadu, ones in South America, and each can try to adapt that in a way that they wish to, that's suitable for a local situation, and I think it also starts to fulfill this need for people to be able to feel they can act in the world and act on the environment, use their creativity, their hands, their networking skills to try and build alternatives to show what's possible. So I don't think they're saying, sure, the whole world can become a bioeconomy in 5 years, but it's really trying to show proof that actually some of these things are possible and you can add huge value to it. I would just like to say that in this case, I think there are genuinely good uses for plastic in the world if we can manage them properly, but there are many, many situations in which we can envisage alternatives and could move quickly towards them.
Talking about innovation, so this could also lead us into finding new ways and or finding new materials as well. On the industrial level, it is, or it will probably be difficult to finding alternatives to plastics at the same scale, but at the same time, maybe we should also look for more sustainable solution in producing with fibers that are not bio-based or not sustainable. Are there any ways to find better solutions? Or, I mean, in producing technology, maybe Michael, you can answer that?
You're more the automation guy, not the textile guy.
I'm missing.
But we did a lot of research work to analyze all kinds of garments and textiles and fabrics that come on our table, because we categorize them. So we work together with all these German institutes of textile, they're pretty strong. And so we know exactly the kind of the woven, the material, the behavior, the weight, how much air goes through, the stiffness, humidity behavior, electrostatic behavior, cutting behavior. We know about everything. Why? It means something to us when we want to grip it. Yeah. So, and this is where we come into place to say, how can we handle such fabrics? The reason why it's done by humans is because they can look, they can grab, they can handle, they can separate one piece from another if it's sticking by the yarns, right, from the cutting, and they can place it. And if something is wrong, they make it, they don't even, they're talking to you and do like this. And this little side process is very hard to automate, right? And this is what we are starting now. We open the door for automation to find these jobs for robotics. So because at the end, the 3Ds make robots work. Dull, dirty, dangerous. Whatever counts, a human shouldn't do it. So this is how we could say, yes, hundreds of thousands of jobs disappeared over the past 50 years, but people don't want to do the jobs anymore. They don't want them back. And we have to do the same here in our text.
Okay, I think we will come back to we come back to such questions like what does happen if we change the system of producing. But first, maybe you just mentioned you know a lot about this material, so information is key in a way. And would you say, or maybe you too also, are there enough informations about bio-based or natural materials in textile industry? What is your take on that?
So the problem with bio-based materials is that we tend to go for what sounds greener, but we still don't know what it really means from the production. So for example, PET or polyethylene terephthalate is often replaced now with polylactic acid. PLA, also in textiles, but more the single-use textiles. However, now we are starting to analyze what's all the energy cost, land cost, and so on, and we are realizing that yes, there is not the problem of microplastics with PLA maybe, but there is the cost of the production from the CO2 production, water, and so on is higher than plastic. So that's the question. Is it really better what we are now putting on the market, or how to start the innovation? Because either we first look at all the single problems that could arise, which will take years and years, or we just start making something and then only later we realize, oh, maybe that was not the right way. And that's probably a big question to which no one has an answer.
Okay.
Or maybe someone does.
Well, I think it's a great question. I don't have an answer, but it did really. I really was thinking this morning as we were looking around the labs at the projects that we were looking at. So I think first we saw the plasma coating of textiles, amongst other things. We saw the medical sensing textiles. Sorry, I'm really tired. I can't remember the third one. But what was clear is that none of us would wish that these textiles weren't being developed. They clearly had useful, or some of them are, the grass. I'm not a football fan. Somebody would maybe argue that the artificial grass is really essential. But actually what's really interesting to me is, like, if we're creating these products as a need, could we build right into the beginning some kind of legislative lever that says, we don't send it out into the world, scale it up. Because I thought the discussion about having a small prototype with the plasma, and then he had a pilot size, and of course they're then selling it to companies that are building very large machines that need massive capital investment, that are producing hundreds of meters a day. It's too late then to start wondering what will happen to it. So the extended producer responsibility, how many years does it take before we think that's a good idea?
Exactly, and then comes the fact into play: the more we produce, the more we use. So this is also the rebound effects which are in play in such transformation of systems. But at the same time, there are alternatives, and on the material level, but also on the production level. You mentioned, Lucy, you mentioned also Pinatex or Milo, all these shiny new materials. What do you think? Is it worthwhile going into this direction, or is it just distracting us from acting more sustainable?
You asked me if anybody else wants to add something, or the audience, but my feeling is absolutely it's worthwhile. These started off often as design projects, PhD projects have taken years to develop, then they attract investment, funding and scale up. But still there are those questions about what is the ultimate structure of that business going to be, and I think there are some interesting other alternatives of young designers that have been developing certain kinds of new biomaterials for textiles. And they're scaling up and getting investment in the idea of having decentralised models, models that can be franchised, models that can be based locally, that could be actually part of local textile systems. So there are different ways in which we could think about information, property rights and circulation of materials.
Yeah. So it's not just a question of inventing materials, but also building up a whole ecosystem in a way. But maybe your take on that.
I'm not I just do microplastics, but I think it's just like there's no specific one material which will create this one solution. Because, for example, a lot of people say, okay, we are not going to wear polyester at all, but we are going to wear only cotton. But we don't have the space to make so much cotton. We don't have water, and as Lucy said, like a lot of the bio cotton is not bio at all, and so it's not like there will be one solution that will save us, and it's more about distributing our production based on the capacities of the world.
Exactly, and I mean, one principle of travel to travel is in fact having this diversity. But maybe you would like to.
It was just yesterday I found a nice video from a London shop or brand or label. I and Me, it's called. I don't know if you know that. No, it's a video. I found this, and it's, to me it was just a thing of about 90 seconds. But you all know this little piece of paper you all have right in your apparel. So what the video is saying is 1 day old from London, that a young lady was holding her mobile phone, scanning a code here. And then the video shows what happens on your mobile phone. The entire history of her apparel is telling her the complete story. And that was kind of flashing me. What's going on here? This is an enabler. Once you make it transparent, with a total cycle, and the product talks to you. Who I am, where I come from, where I am, and where I should go to. You even could say, once you don't love me anymore, then you would return me and you get $5 back if you buy my brother or sister that will be born in 5 years from now, right? So, and this gives the consumers a different awareness of value of something that they have not. Even in fast fashion, I was told many people don't even go washing it after 5 times, they throw it away. This is values kicking with the shoes. We have to change it more.
Yeah, okay. So I think we have a question from the technical department.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there's a whole series of questions that ask about the social consequences of using technologies of automation. So we know what happened when the first textile weaving plants were installed in England, how workers reacted on that, and I think there's a whole series of questions. So so is there a possibility to combine maybe workforce from people with robots, or what will be the consequence if the whole production comes back to Europe? What will happen with the workers in the poor countries? So I think it's a whole series of questions that maybe might be debated now.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for this input. So let's talk about social implications of your goal to bring in robotics and automation into textile production techniques. What do you do with all the workers who are then just discarded?
I hear this very often, and it's always important to really get back very calm and very relaxed with some really true figures. At the time being, and I'm in robotics in 35 years, we install worldwide 500,000 robots, and we are 8 billion people. Okay, so these 800,000 counted back to Germany is 22,000, which 50% goes to automotive industry. So there is not a big, massive thing of robots going into textile overnight. It's not happening. We have 75 million people working in textile worldwide. We have 1.7 million people working in textile in Europe only. So there is no buses of robots coming overnight. A big company, a big brand, whoever, they would install 2 or 3 or 5 robots in the first year. And if they're happy, they take 10 next year. They still employ all the people. I agree with the argument. I would say in 10, 15 years away from now, if automation becomes a normal standard like in automotive industry, and countries like Haiti or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, they have 80% of working in textile, and the reshoring has become a big thing, a normal thing. Yes, but they have still 10 to 15 years time to prepare. It doesn't come overnight.
But then let's talk about the investment which is needed. So don't you think it will make the gap even bigger between the countries who can afford to implement this automation in textile industries and the poorer countries who are just depending on this cheap labor? What do you think?
First of all, we have to look at Europe as a consumer area with 410 million people. We consume apparel every day, right? And we should ask ourselves, where is it coming from? And what is the price we pay for to get it here? And we have to pay a lot of price. Just remember, it's 10 years ago that the factory in Bangladesh collapsed and 1,200 dead ladies were pulled out with apparel on the tags with the brands we know from our shopping centers in our city. This is the price we are paying. So we need to be clear on that. Second, all the apparel we are sending here with 40% overcapacity that's not being sold, we know it already, comes on container ships with 1.2 billion tons of CO2. Half of them get on containers again and get to Sri Lanka, to Chile to get burned. Pollution there, pollution there. This is a price. This is a question we have to ask. And then we see all the other things to develop.
Okay. Lucy, what do you think on these questions? Like the social question?
I think it's really, really interesting. I think there are lots of different ways one could think about it, but I think you did hit on something that is a huge topic, as you've just said, in sustainability, massive overproduction. So it's not surely a case of how robots are going to replace the millions of people who are working in the textile industry, because we're overproducing massively, and if we want to cut production, those jobs are anyway going to change. So I would agree with you on that. And I think, yes, this 40% of overproduction, clothing that gets sold second-hand when it's brand new, I mean, the market is completely skewed.
So at the moment, if I may add that, in my business plan, like I said, my company is 6 months old, so I'm a startup. And my business plan is saying I want to deal with European companies only. Okay? So these companies, I don't deliver to Asia, it doesn't make sense. I may go to US because they have the same conditions like we have here in Europe, but I definitely do not go to Asia. So, but the companies I'm talking to, I don't take the jobs away from the people. I bring in the robots, maybe 5, to a company with 500 people for jobs. They don't find the people putting a fabric from A to B. This is a problem. The machine had cost 500,000 euros. If this stops the machine, it's an additional cost, and that is a problem. So it's not a social discussion of taking jobs away. In Europe, we need the robots to keep the jobs, to keep the machines running, and the company is profitable.
Okay, so let's maybe look at the question. I mean, that the system is rotten. We really know now. But could automation be kind of an instrument to deal the recycling aspects of textile industry better? Could that be also a way to, these sorting? I mean, I was really, I mean, it's impressive to see what happens in sorting our textiles and what is this whole ecosystem, which is hard to swallow. In fact, I mean, would you say that the automation of this process of sorting the used or the second-hand market textiles, could this also be a way to kind of reform the system in a way?
I think I'll just make a comment, and you would also like to. I mean, I know that huge amounts of investment are going into exactly this. So EU funding, research money, private companies, you know, there is so much work being done on infrared automatic sorting, as we know, to try and replace this problem of the hand feeling of this very old, I'm sure there are textile people here who know it's probably a global gesture of actually the feel of what something is. But it's a huge technology, and it requires centralization. It requires massive, you know, not just infrastructure investment, but also property rights and everything else. So it becomes difficult. Where are they going to be located? They're always being promised that it's another 5 years because they don't quite work. And meanwhile, the textile mountains are getting bigger and bigger, and hand sorting is being moved from Western Europe to Eastern Europe to countries in South Asia to the Middle East, now to East Africa. It's not solved yet. Yeah, so we need to stop the model altogether.
Yeah. Okay. So system change.
I'm pretty deep in the research landscape, I would say, with institutes and research funding in Germany. And yes, we do have already a lot of discussions about the recycling and automation of recycling. But again, we have at the moment roughly about 2 million robots working worldwide and about 0.0005% in textile. So we have to start to make something first to be profitable and competitive, making it reshoring and making it where the consumer is. And then we need better material that we can recycle later on. What I learned from talking to customers, they told me, even, we heard it already the day before, it was interesting to me, even if you bring me the recycled raw material, I'm not sure I will buy it. It's cheaper to buy the original. Why should I take it? So I was told, like I said earlier, from the 26,000 tons of recycled, so-called recycled apparel in Germany, only 1% gets the raw material out, and even nobody wants it. So we have to start this process as well by whatever it takes to change that.
I can also add that one of the big problems of recycling is that most of the clothes is actually not one fiber, and that's the biggest issue, how to separate different fibers. And in that, for sure, having chemical, like machines that can tell us the chemical structure of the fibers will help. But again, it goes what Michael said before, that we need to know what our textiles are made of, because also in synthetic textiles or synthetic fibers, it's not only polyester or nylon, there's 500 chemicals that go into it, and you just don't have a chance to know what is there. So if you recycle something and you don't know what's there, how can you know for what you can use it, because it's just all a black box at this point.
And then it gets downcycled anyway, or thermic recycling or something like that. So, but that leads us in a way back to back in the process to the design phase. So monomaterial could be a kind of a design strategy. Also modular design could be a design strategy, even for clothes, for apparel. What do you think? Are your students, Lucy, are they working on that as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think and it's really interesting when we say design for disassembly, or things that are easily going to be disassembled. How, who, why, what we can cut a zip out of the jacket. Did you put it? Sorry. You know, it's very, very complicated. So yes, they are really interested in monomaterials, compostable materials, and for me, I find one of the things that's been really fantastic about moving from a very academic research environment to working with young designers is a very different way of looking at the world, and it really pushes you all the time to ask different questions. And I think I've been going around recycling factories for 20 years, and they've just come with me at me with totally new questions.
So I think we had a glimpse of such thinking this morning and this afternoon by looking at the Tada projects. But I think we have a question on
there was a question on the consumer side. So how do you think that these technologies might change the way how consumers perceive the situation? I mean, everyone knows about these photos, and apparently the behavior of consumers is not changing. So what is your view? How we can, with these technologies, change the perception of the consumer?
I think this is a key question, because at the end, the consumer is paying all we are doing. So the end of the chain is what we decide to do. And the more we have a B2C, the more we can customize the product, the more we have a relationship to it. Once we have a relationship, we value. Once we value, we don't fast fashion and throw it away. So I think, and this is an enabler, once you produce more here, with a B2C, with a customization effort, people appreciate what they're buying much better. And if you take all the costs that you're losing by bringing from China to here, and 40% you're burning and not selling, and put all these costs together, and we have another thing, I don't know about you in Switzerland, but in Germany, we have starting from 1st of January 2023, the Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz. Who knows that? Aha, here we go. So, and this is very serious. I took a training for 3 days at the RWTH in Aachen about this law, just to understand what it's about. This is serious. So the brands, the labels can get a fine of 4 million euros if they break it by a third-party supplier back in Bangladesh. Okay? So, and put all this cost together, you can put in a lot of money to do automation here and produce value fashion that customers appreciate and value.
Okay, and there comes the actor in play, the environment. But we have to speak out for this actor in a way. And one way would be through regulations. Although, as we heard before, regulations also can sometimes make innovations harder to get. So there's a downside to it. But anyway, this would be also a political discussion. But you would like to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think like a lot of consumers are concerned about textiles, but I think the amount of greenwashing is just so incredible that even if you want to be a conscious buyer, it's so difficult. I know that, for example, in the UK there was a survey where they asked which brands are sustainable, and in the top 5 was Primark and I think H&M, and it's just like, yeah, they put there the buy cotton labels, and people don't look further. They don't look that there's 1% recycled of the material in total. They see recycled and they don't look further, and that gives so much opportunity to the textile industry to play with this feeling, to give the consumers feeling, oh, I'm actually not such a bad person for buying all these clothes.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I just would like to add as a sort of bystander rather than being involved in developing standards or being a company that has to try to get them. But as far as I can see, not only is the proliferation of textile standards completely confusing to most of us, it's very, very difficult when you start reading about the arguments and controversies between different certifications. So at the moment, Textile Exchange famously uttered this challenge to use 25% of recycled polyester by 2025, and leading companies like Adidas are very proud to have achieved that earlier. This was all based on, please correct me, those who really maybe could say it wrong, but based on the Higg Index. The Higg Index came out with synthetics being the highest sustainability because they were infinitely recyclable, and fibres like wool and silk being the lowest because they didn't take the use phase into account. And Norway has now banned the use of the Higg Index as a communicated to consumers because the consumers simply don't understand what it represents. So even within the industry, there are huge challenges to reach agreement. And I think what's really interesting about information flows is, I think Circular Berlin have been working on this, is that tag needs to tell the consumer, it needs to tell the recycler completely different information. Where to send it, what it's made of, what system is it going to, so the layers of information that have to be built into a garment cleverly is just enormous.
Okay, so information is key, but it depends on who is communicating what to whom, as media science tells us is always a thing. I guess you have still a question over there?
I would ask if the information would be visible, if there's not everybody's brainwashing with the sustainability, if it would be visible, if it would be also a possibility to say, yeah, I'm sustainable, but that's not so true, and I think there have to be something more clear than how to do it.
I think this is a very important point, and what I could watch, because I'm in kind of this community also by my networks, so I see many things that others promote. The brand CNA is promoting exactly the thing. One is we take sustainability seriously because we employed 140 people in Germany, and our jeans that we sell at 59 euros in the shops is 90% made in Germany. And the second is they have a big campaign that they recycle the jeans, because jeans is quite good for recycling, and they make new jeans and they make it a big brand, make a positive, give it a positive marketing name. You see, that a recycled jeans has a cool name, just for the young generation to think about, no, this is recycled, no, this is cool, right? And this is difficult, but the next generation should do it. Our generation is too old for that probably, but it is hopeful.
So this also brings us back to design, or the role of design in value attribution, and also maybe signaling to us consumers how valuable things are or clothes are. At the same time, I think this is just one piece of the puzzle. How do you say? One puzzle piece. I don't know if it's English anyway. So, but what really brings me maybe to a conclusion, if I may, or if you allow us to do so. So, what I take with me from this afternoon is the problems are manifold, but also solutions or alternatives are manifold, but in fact we should try to work on different or at least at many possible solutions if we want to change the textile industry, and also if we want to change our own behavior. So maybe that could lead us to conclude now this session. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and debating with us. And then I think I give the word to Marianne.